Hi everyone, welcome to this flipped instructional video for English 7. This is Mrs. Alexander. Let's get started. In this video, I will be going through a chapter from this book, Everything You Need to Ace English Language Arts in One Big Fat Notebook. This book I highly recommend to any middle school student looking for a little extra support or reference guide to help them succeed in their English course. Alright, Chapter 28, Researching for Writing. Research is investigation to answer questions and discover new knowledge. We research to get new information and explore our own ideas further. When we research, we first must look for sources, anything or anyone that can give us information. You can get your information from lots of different mediums. Media often refers to mass communication, but media is also plural for mediums. So, medium is a way in which information is delivered. A source can be another text, or it could be something not even written down. It just depends on what you need for your writing. Before you begin your research, you must have a clear idea of what issues you want to learn about and which questions you need to explore. You may want to start by creating a research question, which is simply a question that maps out exactly what you want to research. So here's an example of a good research question. What laws have been proposed in the United States in the last 10 years to close the wage gap between men and women? Now, here's an example of a bad research question. What laws are about wages? Okay, so this second question does not work well because it is so broad. It's too difficult to narrow down our research. Notice in this one, it's discussing laws in the United States and specifically what laws in the last 10 years would close the gap between men and women. So when you're developing a research question, make sure your question is specific enough and includes enough details. Here's another example of a good research question. How does the author treat the subject of magic in The Enchanted Fawn? This question works well because it is focused enough to result in a clear answer, but it's broad enough for that answer to be complex or interesting. You want to make sure you avoid questions that lead to yes or no. That would not be good because you're looking for various perspectives or various reasons to go along with your question. Here's an example of another bad research question. What happens at the end of Enchanted Fawn? Well, why doesn't this question work well? Because it doesn't require much research beyond turning to the last page of the book. It's kind of like a yes or no answer. It doesn't involve various perspectives. Sources. These sources can provide information for fiction writing or evidence to support arguments or analysis. In literary sources, fiction is imaginary, but that doesn't mean we can't learn anything from it. First of all, fiction is often carefully researched by the author, who might have learned a lot about a historical time, like historical fiction genre, or a certain place to write about it accurately in great detail. But whether a fiction piece is heavily researched or not, it can often tell us something about the time in which it was written, how an author thought about it, or how the author thought about the world around him or her. Some literary sources are plays, short stories, blogs, websites, television movies, radio programs, poems, novels, and more. Nonfiction sources. No matter what kind of nonfiction, we know we're always going to find one thing in it: facts. Facts are what you should use in your argument essay. Oftentimes, if you're writing an argument essay, but there's other types of research you'll do for a literary essay or a persuasive essay. Often, that's what we're looking for when we do research. So, nonfiction is frequently where we'll turn to find our information. Some nonfiction sources are newspapers, scientific papers, magazines, expert interviews, radio programs, video presentations, encyclopedias, reputable websites and blogs, and more. So, let's talk about the credibility of sources. Not every source is credible. If your brother is always borrowing money from you but never pays you back, then he's not very credible when he says, "I promise I'll pay you back this time." But the definition of credible, we could say, is believable. And the strength of your argument depends on the strength of your supporting evidence. So the more credible your resource, the better your argument will be supported. So how do you know if a source is credible? You can ask yourself the following questions. Does the author have a good reputation? Do other writers trust his or her work? Has the author been published in a respectable publication manner? Does the publisher have a good reputation? Do other writers rely on this publisher for information? Has the publisher published other works that people quote and use in their writing? How recent is the information? Is the source from the correct time period? Is the information up to date? Does the information match another reliable source? Do two or more other reliable sources show the same information? Using multiple sources. Even when your source is credible, he or she probably doesn't know everything. So to get the whole picture, make sure you use multiple sources. Remember, 2 eyewitness accounts describing the sinking of the Titanic, Elizabeth Shutes, a governess on the ship, wrote, "Our lifeboat, with 36 in it, began lowering to the sea. This was done amid the greatest confusion. Rough seamen all given different orders. No officer aboard, as only one side of the ropes worked. The lifeboat at one time was in such a position that at sea seemed we must capsize in midair. At least the ropes worked together, and we drew nearer and nearer the blacky, oily water. The first touch of our lifeboat on that black sea came to me as the last goodbye to life. And so we put off, a tiny boat on a great sea, rowed away from what we had been our safe home for 5 days." And somebody else wrote, "The officers in charge of loading the boats were cool and masterful, preventing as far as possible all disorder and forcing the command to care for the women and children first." Notice right away that this person's account of the event, Washington Dodge, who was a doctor on the ship, was very different than this person's account. So keep in mind, you want to include multiple sources to keep your credibility. Plagiarism and citation. When writing, it's important to avoid stealing someone else's ideas. That's called plagiarism. You must always give credit to the original author or publisher for their own work. Make sure you cite the source or include a citation if you use someone else's ideas or you use someone else's exact words. So even when you paraphrase information that you found, you still need a citation. So keep that in mind. You want to avoid plagiarism at all costs. So make sure you're citing your sources and including a citation at the end of your paper. Well, when not to cite? This would be when it's just common knowledge. So often during research, we paraphrase or restate ideas or information to include only the stuff we need from a source. When we paraphrase, we avoid plagiarizing because we're putting the research into our own words. But you still need to cite your source when you do this. Anytime you mention someone else's ideas or anything they've discovered in their research, even if you paraphrase them, you have to cite your source. So here's how we cite. There are automatic citation machines such as citationmachine.net or EasyBib that you can use to help create your citation. But here's another way to do it. There are several different styles, and more commonly in English class, you're going to use MLA style. We'll go over the few common types in this video. But the general information that you'll need to include in your citation are an author, the title, publisher, the date of publication, the location of the publication, and the page number where you found that direct quote. Again, there are different style guides that explain how each citation should be formatted. More commonly in English class, you're going to use MLA formatting, and there are websites that can help you with this. Like I said, you can go to Citation Machine or EasyBib, and you can input information to help you create these citations. Each teacher will have his or her own style, so remember, always ask your teacher which type of citation format you should be using. Book citations. Here are some more examples on how to cite certain things, such as websites. If you want to pause the video to look at these citing specifics, please do. All right, in citing quotations, sometimes you may want to include the exact words. This is in quotation marks. You simply provide some context, use correct punctuation, and attribute its source either in the context or as you would cite as specific detail. Again, ask your teacher the way that they would like it, whether it's an in-text citation or a parenthetical citation. Notice here that this person gave the source first in Narrative Life of Frederick Douglass, and then they went ahead and gave their direct quote, which started right here. This is a very long direct quote. Okay, you don't want your direct quote to be any longer than this. It should not be any longer than a few lines. But notice in this one, they gave a parenthetical citation. This is called a parenthetical citation. And that is when you give the author number at the end of the direct quote in parentheses. So for further research and refocusing research, sometimes when you start trying to find out the answer to a question, you might wind up with more questions. So what happens when this happens? Well, if this raises more questions, what are you going to do? You're going to have to do some more research. This doesn't mean you have to do more research for the specific assignment. It might mean that in your paper, you make mention of further research is needed in order to fully understand the first research question that you proposed. So after viewing this video, go ahead and spend some time to check your knowledge. You might need to re-watch the video or certain parts of the video to ensure you fully understand how to conduct proper research for writing. Number 1, true or false? It's not plagiarism if you use someone else's ideas but not their words. Number 2, true or false? If you want to know if a source is credible, check whether their publisher has a reputation for being trustworthy. 3, true or false? We don't always have to cite our source when we use someone else's ideas, just when you use the biggest ones. 4, true or false? You can't draw evidence to support an argument from a literary source because they're not true. Number 5, true or false? If you got a credible source, it's the only source you need. 6, true or false? You can only draw evidence from printed sources, not the internet or television. 7, is this a good research question? Why or why not? What time do the stars usually appear in the sky over Denver in mid-July? Think, is it specific enough? Is it provide more than a yes or no question or answer? Number 8, you are working on a paper about the images taken by the Hubble telescope this year. List 3 possible sources. You are working on a research paper on how Emily Dickinson writes about rain in her poetry. Would a news article about Dickinson family reunion by a distant relative be a good source for the paper? Why or why not? Number 10, choose a current event in the news and research the 2 accounts of 2 people who were actually there and saw it happen. Then write a brief paragraph comparing and contrasting their accounts. There's another video on some K-12 resources for conducting research that I've posted in the help section of your video content. Please make sure you check that out for finding the types of online resources that hold credible information for your research writing. I'll see you on the flip side. Look for Flip's follow-up sessions in your Class Connect schedule. Attend the live session to carry this topic further into practice. Attend Help Lab sessions for extra support. And most importantly, have fun. Sincerely, Mrs. A.